that is it for me. Any questions? Yes, Lou.
Thanks, Farhan. I wondered if you might have an update on negotiations between Morocco and the UN on restoring MINURSO to the status that it was before the recent crisis began. And I wondered if you had anything for me on a question that I asked yesterday. I asked for an update on the review of South-South News' status here, and whether you'll be following the recommendations of OIOS and the audit for improved due diligence, and whether this would also cover the funding sources for media organizations accredited at the UN. Thanks.
Okay, that's a variety of different questions. So first on Morocco, yes, a number of UN officials, including our head of political affairs, Jeffrey Feltman, have been in dialogue with the Moroccan side in recent days, and we'll continue with that dialogue. I think that's moving ahead. Regarding the need for due diligence, of course, we're going to follow any of the relevant recommendations of the Office for Internal Oversight Services, and we'll see how that gets implemented as we explore the recommendations in greater detail. Regarding South-South News, there's nothing I have to say at this stage beyond the fact that their accreditation is being reviewed.
The World Harmony Foundation.
Hold on. Yes, Ali? Yeah.
Thank you. Is Mr. Christopher Ross taking any part in these negotiations between the UN and Morocco? And what does the Secretary General think now about implementing Security Council resolutions in this regard? Also, a follow-up on the question about the media. Is there anything that you're going to do regarding journalists or media people who are accredited to the UN regarding their source of money and whether they're accepting bribes or not? I think Evelyn asked this yesterday and we haven't had an answer. Thank you.
At this stage, I think it's premature to see what kind of steps we can have. You know what the existing accreditation process is. If there's any need to alter it in any way, of course, we'll need to do that in dialogue with the journalists who are here. But certainly, the end goal is, of course, to make sure that all of us can go about our work in an atmosphere that is free of any taint of corruption. How that happens, it's hard to determine at this point. But certainly we'll look at whatever the relevant recommendations are. Regarding Morocco, I wouldn't call this any sort of negotiation. These are discussions that we've been having, and of course many of us, many officials have had discussions with the Moroccans and the other relevant nations for many years, including, of course, Christopher Ross, and he will continue to play a part in this as well.
Same topic.
I just wanted to clarify
yes.
On the same topic, Farhan. You said that South-South News, you're reviewing the accreditation based on the audit, which pointed to questionable funding, financial funds. Mm-hmm. Now, I mean, does that mean that that's becoming a criteria for UN accreditation to make sure that the journalists who are working are transparent about who's paying their salaries?
Obviously, the goal of greater transparency is one that we would certainly like to have. How that's implemented, again, is something that we'll need to see how that can be considered as we approach this. But certainly, in light of the information that we've received, that's relevant in terms of reviewing South-South News' credentials.
Same topic.
Yes.
Same topic. I guess I want to first. I mean, because you've often cut off questions that I've asked, but I want to ask you this question: can you confirm?
That's not true.
No, I mean, you said that you don't ask about. I'm going to ask whether a letter to Mr. Ban Ki-moon from the Government Accountability Project, which says that the treatment of inner-city press was a, quote, crude, high-handed treatment tantamount to a repudiation of Article 19, has been received by Mr. Nolay. And I also want to ask you this. Will you acknowledge that the South-South case involves $12 million given to a news organization, which in turn paid bribes to the UN? What they're charged with is paying bribes to the UN, including an organization of whose members you've just entertained questions from. So I'd like you to describe what exactly it is within the audit, which is not yet released, the Secretariat is reviewing. Is it reviewing funding of Mr. Ng Lap Seng to South-South News, which has nothing to do with the UN, or is it reviewing South-South News as a vehicle to purchase services from the PGA, from a member of the UN Secretariat, from a Kenyan UN official? Which side are you looking at this? And are you looking, as these gentlemen and lady have just asked, at monies received from South-South News by an organization whose office is one floor above us?
At this stage, the detail I have about the review of South-South News is simply that its accreditation is being reviewed. Once we have further details to give, I'll provide that. Some of the things you've just said are highly misleading. I don't know, frankly, whether you've just made allegations against some of your fellow reporters in the room, but that's really an issue for you.
Yesterday,
that's really an issue
by
for you.
South News to UNCA.
You know, for someone who talks about cutting off, you talk over me an awful lot.
Go ahead.
But that's really an issue for you to take up with your colleagues. We are not the policing entity of all the journalists
You had entertained
in the world.
3 questions in a row about accreditation, so I'm asking one.
And I've entertained questions from you. And,
what about
and
the letter from Gap?
What
about the letter from Gap?
Questioned you as well, but that's a whole different question. Let me make it very clear for all the reporters here. This is a press briefing. I will entertain questions from journalists about questions concerning the UN. I do not handle internal housekeeping matters among journalists. I do not resolve disputes that journalists have with other journalists. That's not the use of this briefing.
So the first 3 questions were okay, but mine is not.
Farhan, I've answered your question, and I've
what about
answered
the letter from Gap?
The
letter from Gap. Can you confirm receipt by Mr. Millay? It's a letter to Ban Ki-moon from the same organization that represented Mr. Compass, and it accuses the UN of violating Article 19 and asks for an immediate reversal of Christina Gayach's order. And I'd like to know if you got the letter.
I'll check whether we've received the letter. Regarding your situation, as you know, that's not in our hands. Yes.
Farhan, if you'll just indulge me for a moment to make a short statement, given a lot of my colleagues do that. Matthew, you see us every day. You have never come to the UN Correspondents Association with any of your allegations for comment. I can tell you right now, the UN Correspondents Association is not corrupt. Thank you.
Again, Michelle, as with Matthew, please take these disputes outside of this briefing. This is a press briefing. I understand that you're responding to something that happened earlier in this briefing, but please, from here on out, let's just ask questions about the work of the United Nations, all right?